Principles of Economics, my complete guide to understanding economics, is now available in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook from Saifedean.com, Amazon, and many more booksellers worldwide. And now I am also teaching a course based on this book on my website, Saifedean.com. Principles of Economics will run the whole academic year, from September to June, and will have a new lecture every 2 weeks, as well as weekly live online discussion seminars open to learners from all over the world and from all walks of life. Whether you're a student, a professional, or a retiree, you are making economic decisions every day, and this course will arm you with the wisdom of centuries of economists to improve your economic decision-making. You'll also get a free book of Principles of Economics if you sign up for the course. Go to Saifedean.com and sign up now. The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by Orange Pill app, the Bitcoin-only social network that connects you with high-signal Bitcoiners, events, and now merchants as well. If you're like me and can't stop talking about Bitcoin, you know how challenging it can be to talk to the no-coiners and how nice it is to talk to someone who gets you. With the Orange Pill app, you can find the Bitcoiners near you and they can replace the no-coiners in your life. You can organize events and meetups with local Bitcoiners, and wherever you travel, you can meet up with local Bitcoiners, all while being as anonymous as you like. So if you want to build your local network of Bitcoiners, find a Bitcoin meetup or merchants accepting Bitcoin, head over to orangepillapp.com to sign up, or download the app from the App Store or Google Play Store and send me a DM so we can get connected. This podcast is also brought to you by the Bitcoin Way, your professional Bitcoin IT team offering you personalized, secure, and comprehensive solutions for every step along your Bitcoin journey. The Bitcoin Way offer live concierge service to guide you with your Bitcoin cold storage, running your node, privacy best practices, inheritance planning, corporate strategy, and multi-sig solutions. They don't touch your coins, they guide you through the process of acquiring your coins and securing them. If you'd like to make your setup safer and more reliable, book a consult with them and see what they have to suggest. If you want to give someone the gift of Bitcoin, get them this professional service that will ensure they start off knowing exactly how to manage their coins and not lose them. Go to thebitcoinway.com and start Bitcoining more confidently. Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Standard podcast. Our guest today is U.S. Congressman Thomas Massie. Congressman Massie recently said that he had read my book, The Bitcoin Standard, and it inspired him to table legislation to end the Fed at the U.S. Congress. I'm extremely happy to hear that, of course, because I'm not a big fan of the Fed. And I'm very happy to have Congressman Massie join us today to discuss my book, to discuss all kinds of interesting things. Congressman Massie, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a great book. I want to be clear about something, though. I've taken a vow of illiteracy. I don't read. So I listen to it on my drives back and forth from Washington, D.C. back to home. And actually, at 1.25x speed. It's very dense, so you can't speed it up too much.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So what got you interested in Bitcoin in the first place to look into the book, or was it the monetary aspect that you were interested in?
Well, actually, I have a friend who kept insisting that I read your book. And I said, okay, well, I can't face my friend again until I've read this book because he keeps asking me that. So I listened to your book, and he kept telling me you should start at like chapter 10 or something. I don't know. He was like, the first part you already know, so just skip all that. And I refused to skip it all, and I'm glad I did refuse to skip it all because the beginning part is really good. The whole review about what money is. And I think unless you understand that, you shouldn't be reading the last few chapters of the book. And even though I felt like I had a pretty good concept of what money is, it was good to have some formal framework around my thoughts. And that's what your book provides in the beginning. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I also noticed you're a mechanical engineer. I studied mechanical engineering. I think engineers generally tend to like this book a lot because it just explains money from the perspective of, the supply growth rate, which is just a very neutral metric that you can look at. It makes it simple for an engineer to get the real idea, whereas mostly when you're reading social scientists, they're kind of muddled, I would say, in the way that they describe things, maybe.
Well, listen, I did not know your background. When I listened to this book, I did not know you were an engineer, but I did feel there was a kindred spirit writing this book because at one point you talk about inventions in the book, and you have some of these little sidetracks that I really enjoyed. Also, you know, you really diss on modern art. It just it doesn't really belong in the book, I'm going to tell you, but I could tell it was like this author needs to get this off his chest. And so you bashed modern art, which I appreciated as well. But when you talk about inventions, I think it was in the context of people who say, oh, we can't have too many people on the planet. That's a dangerous thing. But the reality is when somebody invents something, okay, everybody gets to use that, regardless of what your position is on intellectual property and what kind of framework we should have around that. Even if you believe in patents, it still gets shared widely and eventually becomes public knowledge and public domain. And I do believe in patents. Of course, I have to. I signed an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and there are in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, the directive to Congress to create patents. But your point, I think, was if you had, let's say, 10 times as many people on the planet, there would be 10 times as many good ideas, and you would have 10 times as many chances to have another Elon Musk, right? If we got one Elon Musk on the planet now, we might have 9 more Elon Musks if you had, and he's an entrepreneur more so maybe than an inventor, but definitely a creator, and the world would benefit from 1 or 2 more Elon Musks.
Absolutely. I think this is definitely true. I think the whole idea that we have too many human beings is one of those horrific ideas. And I think underlying a lot of that stuff is basically that it is inflation cope. It's really not that the world can't handle so many people. It's that people are being poorer, and we're trying to tell them that it's because the earth is running out of resources. But in reality, they're not getting poorer because the earth is running out of resources. They're getting poorer because of inflation. Inflation is taking away their paycheck.
Yeah, and I think anybody who thinks we're running out of space has never had a window seat on a flight from New York to California. I mean, most of what you see out that window is unoccupied space. Yeah. And I know there are issues with resources in some of those spaces, and that's why they're not as densely populated as others, because we've populated the low-hanging fruit, the easy spots that have running water already. But the problems of like not having water, that is solvable. And I actually have a theory that at some point, water in the atmosphere might become a unit of currency that we trade globally in, because I don't know how we're going to pay off the debt. But one thing we have in abundance in the United States, especially in my state of Kentucky, is rainfall. And what might emerge, it's stupid, but there's like, they try to create a global market in CO2. Okay, that is stupid. But to have a global market in the moisture in the atmosphere and to have sort of rights to seed the clouds over your territory, and you buy those rights from another place like Kentucky. I hope we don't have to sell our rainwater rights, but you could eventually, it may be technically possible to make water precipitate anywhere you want on the planet. And of course, that may come from somewhere else. So there could be a currency in water that evolves. By the way, that didn't come from thinking about the Bitcoin standard. It came from how in the hell are we ever going to pay off our national debt? And I thought, well, they may just take all our water at some point.
Yeah, well, my second book, The Fiat Standard, discusses that. And I think, I can't really summarize the whole thing, but the basic idea is if Bitcoin keeps going up, people are going to start accumulating more and more Bitcoin. And then eventually they're going to realize they don't need to be accumulating debt, because the reason people get into debt is because fiat money is constantly losing value. So that's why everybody in the fiat system is constantly getting into debt, whether it's an individual, corporation, or government. Mm-hmm. It makes sense to be in debt because the money is devaluing. So you want to have the money on your liabilities side of your balance sheet. You don't want to have it on your assets because it's getting devalued. You want your liabilities to go down over time. So that's why everybody's in debt. But as everybody switches to Bitcoin, everybody accumulates savings, everybody accumulates hard assets that appreciates over time. You no longer need to hold debt in fastly devaluing currency. And I think the way forward is going to be that the Bitcoin economy and Bitcoin's cash holdings are going to go up so much that the debt is going to become insignificant. So I think a lot of Bitcoiners want to see it as if there's going to have to be a Mad Max scenario where everything collapses. I think in the Fiat Standard, I try and make the case for why I think Fiat can go out with a whimper rather than a bang. We can just put the house of cards together back gently and slowly into the deck and be done with it.
I don't know if I'm ready for that level of optimism. I serve in Congress. By the way, there was one point where I was listening to your book, and you were talking about how Bitcoin is kind of built so that there's feedback mechanisms to protect itself. And the people who are invested in Bitcoin have a vested interest in defending Bitcoin. And you said that there's no incentive to an attacker to destroy it because you would have to spend large sums of money with no actual gain. And I thought, wow, Saifedean's not met Congress yet. Like, we do that every day. We spend enormous sums of money to destroy things with no apparent gain.
Yeah, I cannot argue with that. I definitely cannot argue with that. And I think that's the second thing I wanted to talk to you about in general, your perspective on U.S. debt and U.S. government spending. I should say, for listeners who aren't very familiar with American politics, Congressman Massie ticks all the right boxes, which is really impossible for a politician. He spoke out against the COVID insanity, spoke out against all kinds of foreign policy insanity, spoke out against the war in Gaza. I think maybe one of very few congressmen who did that. Speaks out against AIPAC, probably the only one in Congress who has done that. So it's a very lonely place, I presume, being in Congress, but I think that is a great compliment for you that you don't fit in with the rest of these people.
Yeah, I kind of am a square peg in round holes up here.
Yeah. So how do you see things moving forward in terms of Congress? Do you think there is any potential for any kind of changing of direction in terms of government spending, or do you think it's pretty much hopeless? Both parties are going to continue to move in that same direction.
Well, what I say now might be further evidence to people who think we have to have some cataclysmic apocalyptic resolution may be right. Because, I'm wearing my debt badge right now. I call it my anxiety generator. It displays the national debt at every instant of the day, and it's got Wi-Fi, and it actually goes to Treasury's website once a day and gets the debt to the penny, because they publish it only once a day. They're a few days behind, so I calculate also with the software the debt per second over a 1-year rolling average, and I use that to interpolate to what the debt is at any point in time. Now, the reason I built this, people can't conceive 14 digits, like how big is that? But they can look at the smaller digits, the last 6 digits, and be like, holy crap, I can't even read those digits. They're changing so fast. And the one digit that you can read is like the $100,000 digit, and it's $100,000 a second. So that's just, I'm explaining this to you to explain how it generates anxiety among my colleagues, and the reason, and I know they're thinking, wow, as if Massie needed an accessory to generate anxiety. I probably generate enough anxiety just on my own, but it's fun to generate a little more anxiety. And I do that to try to get them concerned about it, but they are unconcerned. And here's the thing, nobody up here, I've been here 12 years, I've never seen anybody lose an election because they spent too much money. Nobody ever gets indicted for racking up debt. Now, sometimes people spend money on the wrong things that their constituents don't like, maybe abortion, and then they lose an election, or spend money on gun control. But generally, the amount of money we spend is not an indictable offense here at the election box, right, at the polling location. And so I blame the people for the lack of urgency. Like my first few years here, I would blame other congressmen, but then I came to realize they just reflect what the people who elected them, what their preferences are, which is, hey, give me stuff and don't make me pay for it, and tell me everything's going to be fine. And that's, the congressmen are just doing what they want. So I think there is going to have to be some kind of reckoning. And frankly, I'm amazed we've gone 12 years without some sort of collapse or some sort of more negative thing than is already happening. Is the thing that's happening now, is this the beginning of the end? Maybe it is. I think the Fed doesn't have as much control as they would like us to think at this point. like, can they really lower interest rates more than, say, a point right now? They may lower it a little bit right before the election to make things look a little better, but could they cut interest rates to 2% right now? I don't think they can. The sovereign funds of other countries are looking at our debt and saying, I'm not buying that at 4% even. So I don't think we're in as much control that the Fed is in as much control as we think. This is one of the realizations I came to about a year ago. By the way, I was just meeting with some people who are complaining about the swipe fees on credit cards. When you go to a gas station and you buy gas, well, the company, the retail outlet, may only be making 1 or 2% on that transaction per gallon, but the credit card company is making 2 or 3% on the transaction, and they're not even there. And so that is actually the way I look at the US dollar, our fiat currency that's being held overseas in reserves at other countries. They want to, let's say, for instance, you're a small country and you want to build some infrastructure and you need to plan to buy steel in the next 6 months for bridges. Well, if you hope to buy it in your own currency, it fluctuates so much that you may only be able to build half as many bridges 6 months from now. So they hold US dollars so they can buy things with US dollars. And because everybody's holding US dollars because they want to transact in US dollars, when we print or create 3% more US dollars, everybody just has to take it in the shorts. And it's still a better deal for them. Okay, I'll pay you 3% in order to have a reliable transaction at any point in the near future or far future even. We are a fairly stable currency compared to everybody else. So we're the credit card transaction vendor. We're charging the world 3% to do these transactions because we're creating 3% more money. And we can get away with what we've gotten away with because we're not just taxing our own people with inflation, we're taxing the world with inflation. I'm not sure how much longer that can go. The one thing Putin said in his interview with Tucker Carlson that I do agree with, he kind of laughed and he said, before you sanctioned us, 70% of our transactions with other countries were in US dollars. And then he was like, now it's like 17% of our transactions. Now that's not a debatable thing. Like, we could go look at what the numbers actually are. And I think he's probably pretty close to the truth there. And if we keep sanctioning people, that may be the end of our chance to be the transaction vendor for the world and charge them 3%.
Yeah, it's true. Although I think that threat can probably be overplayed. People seem to think that it's rather straightforward for China and India and Russia to just go off the dollar. But there's a lot of network effects with money. And most people want to hold dollars not because they're threatened by the US. They want to hold it because it is the most liquid asset. And even for all of its problems, it's still much better than vast majority of currencies out there because it's so big. It's got a hugely liquid market. And I think this is by the way,
we're on the aircraft standard right now, aircraft carrier standard, not the gold standard. That's what we're backed by.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm not so sure. I think it's the other way around. I think the aircraft carriers are backed by the dollar rather than the dollar backed by the carriers. The dollar is the global money because it is the most liquid money, and that's because the US has the most liquid, largest capital markets and the biggest debt markets, and that's what allows people to get in and out of it. And so I think by conventional metrics, you look at the US and you think, all right, this is cooked, this is done. They're at a point where they're paying more for debt service than they're even paying for war. And they're paying for a lot of war. I mean, there's a lot of murder taking place. And yet the US is spending more money on its debt than it is on murder, which is outstanding. But with all of that, they still have a planet of 8 billion bag holders who don't have a better financial asset to hold than dollars and treasury bonds. And that's, I think, the real issue here.
Well, there's something else we did recently. I don't know if it's made it to the president's desk and got implemented, but at least in the House of Representatives, we passed something called the Repo Act. And it sounds like a great idea for the first 30 seconds. We're going to seize Russia's sovereign assets that we can get our hands on here in the United States, and maybe in Europe if we could convince our partners, but here in the United States, we can put our hands on some of their assets, seize them, build weapons to be used against Russians with their own money. Wow, what a concept. The problem is the thing that is here that we can seize are the things where they bought our debt, like treasuries. So we're not really repossessing Russian things. We're defaulting on our debt to Russia because they had bought some of it. It's on the ledger here and you can just take it off the ledger. Well, that sends a message also, not to Great Britain or Australia. We're not likely to default anytime soon on our obligations to them. But if China, if something comes up with Taiwan there and we try to put pressure on them, China's thinking, wait, they might do to us what they did to Russia. So let's don't keep anything on their ledger over there for their debt. And I think it already has affected the price that we pay to service our debt.
Yeah, likely it is true. But I still think, something like that happens. We still need a solution. And I still think the only solution for this kind of problem is Bitcoin. It's the only way to get around it. So I'm curious. I know from my friends Pierre Rochard and Michael Goldstein, they presented to you once in Washington about Bitcoin. And they said that you really got it before then. So what do you really think of Bitcoin? How far down the rabbit hole are you?
Well, the expert here in Congress is Warren Davidson. He's a representative from Ohio, and he's further down the rabbit hole than I am. So I have to concede that right now. And I actually sublet a room from Warren Davidson. We were roommates for a while, and he has held sort of like clinics in Congress for other congressmen to try to explain to them concepts like Bitcoin, and he brings in experts to talk about this and try to explain it to congressmen. Now, sometimes it's like trying to read Shakespeare to my cattle. There are some blank stares. Blank stares were noticed, and they don't stay very long. They get the free sandwich and leave. But there are some congressmen that linger. And then he did a clinic on central bank digital currencies and what the state of play is around the world. And he brought in some people, some very well-known people to explain that. So I have some familiarity with it, although I learned some stuff in your book that brought me further down. I don't know about the rabbit hole. Like in some sense, toward the end of your book, it's like a wet blanket. If you had some pie in the sky preconceived notions that were wrong about Bitcoin, which I kind of did, I don't want to be like a buzzkill and people are going to be like, oh, Massie, he doesn't get it. But I guess the sobering thing that your book says that people need to grasp, and I don't think my colleagues grasp this, is that there's a limit on the number of transactions you can complete. And this is I actually didn't understand the name of your book until I got to this part of the book, that you got to look more at Bitcoin as sort of the reserves, like the gold, that we don't carry around gold coins and buy cars. Even when we had a gold standard, right? People weren't packing around gold bars to buy houses. If they were very based, but and I may be completing some of my transactions with cattle for gold in Kentucky. I can't discuss that, but there was always sort of some intermediate currency, like the dollar when it was backed by gold. And in that sense, that's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that's your view of Bitcoin. When you have sort of this other layer of transactions that are happening, not necessarily on Bitcoin. They're not, because they're not going on the ledger. They're happening instantaneously, and then they're getting aggregated, and then in clumps being put on the register because of sort of the number of bits or bytes. I forget the unit you measure it in that those things can be in. So anyways, that was sort of like a little wet blanket when you get to that point. in understanding it. And then also just driving home, and I'm an engineer. My undergraduate's electrical engineering and computer science. So like I wrote the code for this debt badge. It's written in C and I wrote it myself. So like I kind of get some of these concepts, like the distributed database, the limitations of that, where everybody has to record the transaction, and how you point out having a centralized database is far more efficient in keeping up with thousands of transactions, every second.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really, there was a lot of messianic hype around Bitcoin where people just presented it as if it's going to be free, instant, trustless transactions for everybody at all times. And while that would be nice, the fact that we can't get to it doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin has failed. I mean, it's a little bit like saying, aviation is not going to get anywhere because they're never going to be able to invent teleportation. And so as long as we don't have teleportation, then all of these jets don't mean anything. We might as well stick to donkeys, because that's really what the difference is. Federal Reserve is you have one central authority that is responsible for everybody's transactions on Earth. The Federal Reserve, basically, everybody has to transact through the Federal Reserve or through institutions that work through the Federal Reserve. But now with Bitcoin, we can have a system that is far more decentralized with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of federal reserves effectively around the world, but they don't get to set their own monetary policy, and they can't censor transactions, and they can't print their own money.
People watching this may think I was completely ignorant before I read your book. I did know about a lot of these things. It just sort of drives it home or reconfirms suspicions that I had. And I was very encouraged to get a lot of my notions confirmed, and then to understand better how these transactions get aggregated and then later reported to the register to get around the transaction limits and things like that.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Okay, so what are your thoughts then on Bitcoin? Like, are you just sort of sympathetic, or are you really, would you call yourself Team Bitcoin already?
Well, I'm not ready to go out and buy coffee with it every day and like insist that I won't buy your coffee if you can't take my Bitcoins.
Yeah, but that doesn't really matter. That's
Right.
the kind of evangelism that really doesn't really move the needle. It's not about buying the coffee as far as I'm concerned. It's about holding your cash balances in Bitcoin. That's what matters.
Yeah, I think it's, after reading your book, I decided it's even more legitimate form of reserves if you're trying to store the fruits of your labor that you've accumulated. I don't want to give financial advice, right? I'm a congressman. I'm trying to be very careful not to do that. But I was impressed. And the other thing is that it's an existence proof. The fact that it's not gone down, the fact that, and this is another thing I can tell you from my perspective. I talk to credit unions. Remember, I'm a congressman. Like, lobbyists are talking to me every day. And so I'm in an information flow here that's a little bit different than others. And what I heard these credit unions say is, we hold some Bitcoin. Our people told us to do that in case we get ransomed, then we can pay it. And so it wasn't really the best reason to hold Bitcoin, but they have some Bitcoin. Now, I don't know how much they have, but once credit unions and banks start holding it, then because they are lobbyists, now when the institutions have a stake in it, I think you should add that to your list of reasons Bitcoin is not likely to fail, because government, I think, is the biggest threat. Okay. And I know Bitcoin is designed in a way that it doesn't rely on government, but don't underestimate the ability of government to kill things. And then the willingness of people to comply with stupid rules. Don't assume there'll be mass non-compliance and people just keep using Bitcoin if Bitcoin were outlawed. There are way too many sheep in this country. But one of the positive feedback things for Bitcoin is now I know institutional investors hold it, and those institutional investors have sway in Congress. And so instead of looking at it now as a liability, it's literally an asset on their ledger, and they're more likely to tell Congress to don't mess with our Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think this is something that has surprised me. I mean, I would have thought the U.S. government would have been a lot more aggressive, but instead we see congressmen and senators being good towards it, and we're seeing major financial institutions moving toward it, which I think makes it so much more likely that it continues to survive and it continues to function. Now, you were mentioning lobbyists. You kicked up a storm recently by talking about AIPAC. I don't know if you know this, but I am Palestinian myself, and I grew up in the West Bank, and so obviously I'm quite interested in what is going on there, and it's something that I've always known about American politics and about the way that American politics works. So I guess my question for you is, when exactly did you find out that all your colleagues in Congress are traitors?
uh, I'm not going to call my colleagues traitors. I'm about to go work with them here in a few minutes. I think most of the people that I know, all the ones that I know well here in Congress, are well-meaning people who ran for the right reasons. And I do think they get, a lot of them are a reflection of their constituents, and a lot of them see their job as making as many friends up here as they can so that they can get things done for their constituents. So I'm trying to defend their poor positions very generally.
You didn't really convince me much, but I mean, in general, what do you think of American foreign policy and how it is going? And do you see any kind of way of this changing? Usually, people think that opposition to U.S. foreign policy has to come from the left, but I think there's a very powerful strand on the right and among Republicans, people like you and Ron Paul, who have follow a long tradition of conservatives and libertarians who don't want to fight wars abroad because it is immoral, because it is wasteful, because causes trouble and it comes back to bite you, and because you shouldn't be killing people. Why?
Well,
yeah, go
let
ahead.
me tell you, my foreign policy, I joke, I tell people I learned it in Sunday school back in Kentucky. When my mom made me comb my hair and put on tight shoes and go to Sunday school. The one thing I remember was the golden rule: and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it just makes complete sense. And our country is engendering bad will around the world by empowering people to do things to other people. War is what I'm talking about. We're funding wars all over the place, and we're funding aggression. And I'm not commenting on whether the wars are righteous or not, but I don't think we should be funding any of the wars. Like, I think it would be wrong of you to think that I'm like the Palestinian Republican hope here in Congress, because
Certainly not.
I'm not. As we say in Kentucky, I don't have a dog in any of these fights, and so I'm not picking sides. And because I won't pick sides, people get mad at me. People are literally mad at me for not hating people. Okay, it's like, I won't be your friend unless you hate my enemies too. And we're like, no, I have no need to accumulate more enemies. So I've never voted to sanction another country. This makes for some very difficult votes, right? The first year or two I was here, you don't vote to sanction Iran, don't vote to sanction North Korea, you don't vote to sanction Russia. And at first they were like, what, you like Putin, or you like that dictator, or you agree with their policies? I'm like, no, I'm not going to vote for sanctions. But here I am in my 12th year in Congress. It's a lot easier to take that position now. And I have members of Congress who come up to me and say, man, I wish I had started out on the same foot as you had on sanctions, because I know this is a bad thing to vote for, this sanction. But I've voted for so many other sanctions. If I don't vote for this sanction, it looks like I'm picking a side. So I'm very happy with the policy I started out with, which is don't sanction any country. Obviously, we're not going to sell everybody F-35s. We're under no obligation to do that, to share military secrets or equipment. So you can refuse to do that. But as far as like not transacting in steel or lumber or computers, personal computers or cell phones, I think it's ignorant not to do that, because you're basically punishing the people in that country more than you are the regime that you're trying to influence, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, I'm under no illusions. I don't want people to be, I don't want Americans or American Congress to be supportive of Palestinians or to be enemies of Israel. I think, I mean, at this point, you guys give so much weapons and money and diplomatic support and cover for the Israeli government that it is ridiculous. I mean, the Israeli government faces more opposition in its own parliament than it does in the US parliament, because there is some debate. There are people trying to unseat Netanyahu, so they will disagree with him. But it doesn't matter whoever they put in charge. They come to Congress, everybody but Thomas Massie starts clapping, and they have absolutely no ability to dispute any of the things that he does.
That's right. You can't criticize Netanyahu here, but you can do it in Israel. In fact, we're going to have Netanyahu come and speak to Congress. And
ridiculous.
I think what's happened there is, I think, honestly, our State Department, or some level within the State Department, called up the Speaker of the House and said, we need to prop up Netanyahu's popularity around the globe and at home. So bring him to the U.S. Congress and have him speak. And that will impart to him some more credibility and popularity. I think it's a tool of statecraft, really. And Congress is being used by the executive branch, not even elected people within the executive branch. These are people who've been here for 20 years, who have an agenda, a global agenda, and we're going to be props. They're going to be 435 props. Well, they're going to bring senators and park them in the same room. So there'll be 535 props to try and influence Netanyahu, or try to prop up his popularity at home. And then meanwhile, we pass, sometimes in a month, we'll pass more than a dozen resolutions that have to do with Israel. We don't even name a dozen post offices every month here. It's a little bit embarrassing, frankly. And I know some of my colleagues are embarrassed. They won't say it. They're just like, gosh, can we knock this off? Can we just quit virtue signaling? Can we go 1 week without doing that?
And the answer is no, we cannot. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's honestly absurd. And for people outside of the US, it looks ridiculous. I mean, if you've ever looked at politics, if you see the concept of a puppet state when a government controls another government, this is exactly what it looks like. I mean, in the 1990s, I used to live in Lebanon, and Lebanon was effectively a puppet state of Syria at that time. And this is what it was. You were a Lebanese politician if you were loyal to Syria. And that was it didn't matter what you did to Lebanese people. It didn't matter if you were corrupt. It didn't matter if you were honest. None of that mattered. What matters was one criteria only: loyalty to the master state. And this is essentially what it looks like in the US. You saw the congressman in the primary who got torpedoed with $14 million of AIPAC money. But I think what's really,
by the way,
Jamal Bowman, your friend,
yeah, Jamal Bowman is just a flaming idiot. I mean, I don't think that somebody should be able to spend that much money on one issue without disclosing more than they do or registering as foreign agents. I mean, they just said, we're representing Israel. Now, we're Americans, but we're lobbying on Israel's behalf, and we're influencing a U.S. election on Israel's behalf. And I think that's wrong. But Jamal Bowman is just a blooming idiot. I mean, he's also, if you have not seen it, watch my little dialogue with him in the hallway that went viral. And then also watch, the video of him pulling the fire alarm. I was kind of like AIPAC picking on the stupid kid in class, giving him a wedgie in the sandbox. He was an easy target, I think, and he made himself more of a target. So I wouldn't make that a referendum. Now, by the way, I do want to say one thing earlier. I talked about, I don't have a dog in the fight, and I'm not going to pick a side. I will say this. I think the war in Gaza needs to end. And I think that, I've pointed out in hearings that 1% of the population of Gaza has been killed. If that were
more by now, a lot more, probably 2 or 3, maybe 5 at this point.
Yeah, my testimony was a month or two ago. so people say, oh, the acceptable civilian, we're now talking about acceptable rates of civilian deaths to enemy combatants. And they're trying to say, oh, this is a great ratio. There's only like 2 or 3 or 5 civilians dying for every enemy combatant. The ratio was much worse in Afghanistan or something like that. And so they're trying to measure it with that metric. And I'm like, but look, as a percent of the population, it's 1% of the population. That's like 3.5 million Americans. 3.5 million Americans dying would be 1% of our population. And you are in that situation. How do you extract yourself from that? If the problem was that people in Gaza hate people in Israel, for justified or unjustified reasons, how are you helping that situation by killing 1% of the population? What is the end game?
The end game is to kill as many as possible and to make Gaza uninhabitable as much as possible so that as many Gazans leave as possible so that Israelis can move in and get the real estate. This is really what it's about. And I think all of this idea about freeing the hostages is just a distraction so that they could continue to doing this because they don't want to free the hostages. And Israel's government is really going out of its way to ensure that the crisis continues so that they can kill as much as possible. And this is something that they say openly. I mean, people talk about extremism on the right in the US, and I find that hilarious because if you could pick the absolute most extremist Nazi, literal Nazi in the US, the people that never make it into Congress or make it into TV, and try and look at their platform and then replace the words Christian American or white American with Jewish Israeli and replace the words brown American or Muslim American or Jewish American with Palestinian. And then look at that where it fits on the political spectrum in Israel. Practically the most bigoted, racist policy in the US would be basically middle of the road in the Knesset. If you listen to the people that are in Netanyahu's government, they're very open about this. We need to get as many of these Palestinians out of Gaza. And this has been the modus operandi of Israel from day one, from 1940s. It's more land and fewer Palestinians. That's what they are working for. And it's, the tricky part for them is they can't just go and kill everybody because they're relying on America for weapons. So they need to make it look like we're trying to fight Hamas, but really they're destroying the infrastructure. I mean, you could say that they've lied so much about this hospital is Hamas and that hospital is Hamas or whatever, but it can't be that every single hospital is Hamas, every single water processing plant is Hamas, every single power plant is Hamas. Every single thing that makes life possible has been deliberately destroyed, and they've been destroyed with they put bombs in them and blow them up. So there was no threat. They were already in the building. They conquered the building. There's nobody there, but they're destroying it just to make sure that everything is unlivable. It is a genocide. It's a textbook case of genocide. And I think it's remarkable that people are in the US are gaslit into thinking, no, this is just a war and it's self-defense and you need to keep paying for it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a measure of where, how gaslit people are is I put out a meme a few months ago, and man, I caught a lot of heat for it. I think it got like at least 7 million views, where it's the point was you can't embrace patriotism in the United States. Like you're like if you say the nation of the United States is a great nation and we are great and we are unique and we should embrace our founding fathers, and like if you go down that path, like you will be profiled by the FBI, okay? Whereas Zionism is the equivalent of Israeli patriotism to some degree. It's okay if you're an American to be a Zionist. In fact, you are anti-Semitic if you're not a Zionist in the United States. Congress has passed resolutions stating that very thing, okay? So you're the equivalent of a racist if you don't believe in Israeli patriotism. But if you do believe in patriotism in the United States, you are also a racist. And so I did one of those memes, the classic memes where it's like, and it's like, yeah, okay, you can, Zionism, yeah, American patriot, no.
I think this
and I got in a lot of trouble, but I didn't delete it because it's true.
It is very true. And I think a lot of Americans just use Zionism as their outlet for nationalism. And I think it's astonishing. And I'm going to just bring up this issue, which I find astonishing, because Israel did attack the American military. In 1967, there was a deliberate attack against the USS Liberty. 36 sailors died, hundreds were injured. And it was a systematic attack. And they knew that it was an American vehicle, of a vessel. They had a huge American flag. And it's, you would think, well, why would they do that? They were fighting a war with Egypt. Why would they do it? And the answer is they did it in order to sink the boat and then make it look like it was Egypt that did it, because it was close to Egyptian territorial waters. And then Israel would get into war with Egypt. But this got entirely covered up and nobody talks about it. And more than 90% of Americans don't even talk about it. But this is America's greatest ally. And this was, President Lyndon Johnson, who was a big supporter of Israel at that time. So he covered it up very well and did his job. But here we are 50, 60 years later, and it's still covered up, and nobody talks about it. Nobody knows about it. And the people just assume that it was an accident. Well, accidents happen with one stray bullet, one stray missile. But this was a systematic attack with artillery and aerial bombardment that lasted for more than an hour with a giant American flag that was visible. And Americans just completely forget it. Don't you want to launch an investigation into that? Don't you think?
If I just investigated all the evil that has begun since I got into Congress and went forward, there's not enough hours in the day. I mean, I just had a hearing on the evil behind the vaccination approval in the United States and how they broke all of our own laws and rules to promote the vaccine. And so I don't have a committee of jurisdiction where I could do that. But it's hard to go back and exhume things like that. And to know exactly what happened. I mean, so I am familiar with it. The motive that you just put out is like the first time I've heard that the motive was to make it look like it was an Egyptian vessel that sank. But send me information on that. I'll look at it.
I will. I absolutely will. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, because I think it's a huge deal. And I think Americans need to ask a little bit more critical questions. I mean, they ask a lot of critical questions of their own government, but this one foreign government somehow just cannot do any wrong.
By the way, I'm also investigating the pipe bomb, which I think the federal agencies were involved with that, or people associated with federal agencies. The pipe bombs on January 6th. That's something nobody is looking into. I released video that showed there's even more questions that need to be answered there. A lot of these places people won't go, I will go, but there's just not enough hours in the day.
Well, hopefully, we like to, in the Bitcoin Standard podcast, we like to bring everything back to Bitcoin. Hopefully Bitcoin fixes this. Once Bitcoin takes the money printer away from you and your colleagues, there's going to be a lot less time to do bad things. And then we can start having more time to revisit the giant backlog of bad things that happened in the past.
Yeah. And the money printer, I think you assigned blame appropriately in that sentence, because, the Federal Reserve needs to end, but it's just a tool. And Congress is the one that is directing all of the profligate spending that is unsustainable. And the Fed is just basically a way to accomplish that. I mean, it's other things too. And it's got CFPB inside of it, which is another evil unto itself. I think whole universes will spawn into existence out of that Supreme Court ruling that says the CFPB, that Congress can create an agency that's no longer accountable to Congress and can create it gets to suck off the teat of the Federal Reserve and has its own revenue source that can make money. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's just, as long as you have a money printer, there's no balance, there's no check from reality. There's no feedback from reality that can correct all these horrible mistakes taking place. The syllabus for my new online economics course, Principles of Economics, is now available on Saifedean.com. The course will take place over 18 lectures, each based on one chapter from my new book, Principles of Economics, which will be available for free as an ebook for everyone registering for the course. Lectures will be released once every 2 weeks on Mondays, starting on the 25th of September 2023, and will be available in video and audio format. Live discussion seminars will be held once a week on Thursdays at alternating time slots, 12 hours apart, to ensure learners can attend from all over the world. I'm happy to announce that I have set up my new publishing house and online bookstore, The Safe House, which will be publishing and delivering the best Bitcoin and Austrian economics books worldwide in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook formats. Go to thesafehouse.com to buy my latest book, Principles of Economics, as well as the Fiat Standard and the Bitcoin Standard. And now I'm also publishing Fiat Food, Matthew Lysiak's amazing investigation into how inflation ruined our diet and health. And I'm also publishing Lynn Alden's Broken Money, her masterful exploration of the failures of the global financial system and how Bitcoin fixes it. This is a Bitcoiner's bookshop, so the books are printed in beautiful cloth hardcover made to last, with an ice-colored dust jacket on top. Go to thesafehouse.com and get yours now. I think we've taken enough of your time. I want to thank you so much for your time.
Well, I am over time, but I have a bone to pick with you.
Yes, go ahead.
So first of all, the book was awesome. I love it. And I love all the little side missions to attack modern art as for what it is, and to promote invention. One thing, like I had some hunches that were confirmed. And one of them is, people are always in my office promoting ideas. And I've heard there was all this enthusiasm for blockchain. Oh, we should blockchain this. Blockchain is the perfect thing for this. This is a great application of blockchain. And there are people who come to me with this, and my hunch was, I don't get it. I don't think so. I think there's a better way to do that. I don't see what value blockchain adds to the thing that you're trying to do there. And your book confirmed for me that there are sort of a lot of people using blockchain as snake oil, and it'll cure every problem you have. No, it's not that. It's great. Blockchain is great, right? And it's enabled Bitcoin, but it's not the thing that will solve all the world's problems, or even a few of the problems.
Well, it's going to give us Bitcoin, and that's the only application, as far as I'm concerned, is Bitcoin, and that is what's going to solve all of the world's problems.
So how much hate did you get when you said that? Because there's a whole industry of people promoting blockchain from breakfast cereals, need blockchain.
Yeah, I did. It made me a little bit like Massie in the crypto industry, if you want. But a lot of people give me a lot of grief for it. But I think they have a kind of love-hate relationship, because for most of the people in the crypto world, I think they find my book is the kind of best book to try and give to somebody that could get them to pay attention to what's going on. I just sort of, in terms of the track record, it's been published now 6 years ago, and it's still generally the best-selling book on digital currencies. So they like having my book because it's the thing that they can give to their mom to explain to her what we're doing. Yeah. But then they also hate it because it's telling their mom that, okay, well, Bitcoin is okay, but what your son is doing is kind of a...
So, and then what about, you didn't put, is it safe to say you don't have a bust of Milton Friedman in your office?
No, I do not. Did you like that part, or what did you think of it?
So I did like that part. I think it's important that you tease apart some of these things that are all put in the same bucket and say, no. There's actually two views here, or infinite views, and factions that don't agree with each other. So you can't. I liked that. I like that you were critical of somebody who everybody has on a pedestal. But obviously you don't have a bust of Milton Friedman on a pedestal there in your office. I don't see one.
I know. And most people who attack Milton Friedman attack him from the left for not being Keynesian enough. Yeah. So this is a real mind bender for people when they see, no. Okay. Essentially, I'm calling him a socialist, which is the...
I have that same sort of issue, and you may disagree with me on this. I think you probably do. The Road to Serfdom. I think that book is way overrated.
Yeah, I agree.
And there are some socialist notions in there that are just accepted as fine.
Yeah, it's a good book to give to your socialist friends to get them to start doubting socialism. If thinking about it critically, then you realize, no, it's. He pokes holes in the socialist argument, but still falls back on lighter socialist arguments. I agree with you.
Right. So, and that's Hayek, by the way. But
That's Hayek, yeah. That's why you got to stick to Rothbard to be on the safe side.
Are you a Rothbardian?
Yeah, very much so. I'm a big fan of Rothbard. He's my favorite.
Okay. So here's the one bone I want to pick with you. When I was in college, I took microeconomics at MIT. I was looking for the humanities classes where I didn't have to write papers. It was like, and economics qualifies as humanities. It's called humanities and social science. So you could complete a large portion of your humanities classes by just taking economics classes and doing problem sets.
Which is very easy for engineers.
Yeah, so that's what I chose to do. So I took microeconomics and I freaking loved it. And honestly, even though Bitcoin, people are applying it to a macroeconomic issue, there's a lot of microeconomic decisions in there, a lot of things that you're thinking about. And I love microeconomics because it explains why coupons exist, why when you get on an airplane, nobody has paid the same price for their ticket, and why you have first class, why you have a Chevrolet and a Cadillac made by the same company. It's just beautiful. And you can explain behavior with math and graphs. And I was intoxicated by it. So I was like, well, if micro is good, macro must be great. So the next semester I signed up for macro. Oh my gosh. There was a young upstart associate professor. His name was Paul Krugman, and he was the teacher. And people tell me, they're like, oh, that's back when he wasn't a full-blown commie. And I'm like, whoa, I don't think so. I took his class in, I think it was 1991 or 92. And it's an MIT class. It was called Introduction to Macroeconomic Theory, which sounds kind of like an easy class because it's an intro. But it goes into all the areas. And I remember walking up to him at the end of class and saying, you just put some equations on the board, but you did not solve them. The relationship of inflation to interest rates or whatever, okay, there's an equation there and there's one here. And okay, now you've got 3 equations and 3 variables. You should be able to solve this, right? Or build a model that predicts what happens, but he never did. And it was all a lot of hand waving stuff as compared to microeconomics, where you actually solve the equations and you can find the point on the graph where things crossed. So that was my complaint. He did in that class talk about the Chicago School. I don't ever remember him talking about Austrian economists, but he did talk about the Chicago School. And I think the academic in him felt compelled to tell us there was another version of how to explain the world that wasn't his version. And he made a half-hearted attempt to say what they might have thought at the time. But here's my beef. And this is my beef with, not just with you, but with all these people who read these Austrian economists and then become experts in economics. And I know where you're coming from, okay? But I saw in your book, you have a disdain for people who try to use math to explain macroeconomic things. And I share some of that disdain because I saw Paul Krugman pervert math as if he was using math to make his case, but he wasn't really. My problem is, and maybe you can point me to a good book where this isn't the case, I think we should be able to win this argument with math. Why does it have to just be paragraphs and nice sounding words and all these books by the Austrian economists? Why can't we bust out and do a problem set and have a system of equations and maybe some linear algebra and a little bit of calculus if you can stand it? We should be able to win this argument with math, and then now you have a proof instead of these philosophical things.
Well, first of all, let me just note that you're making the argument for math using words. So ultimately, math cannot speak on its own.
Well, I would just speak in numbers if I thought people would enjoy the podcast.
Well, let me tell you, this is what I discuss in my third book, Principles of Economics, which is like an Austrian textbook. And the first chapter is specifically dedicated to answering this question: why is it that the Austrians don't like to put a lot of equations into their economics? And there are a lot of papers written about that. There's a lot of discussion about it. But if I were to zero in on the precise explanation for it, I get this from Mises, and not a lot of people focus on this from Mises' work. But it boils down to one simple fact, which is that when you're doing a physical phenomenon, when you're looking at physics, you are using mathematical constants that can define physical quantities that are objectively understood by everybody, and everybody understands what they are. So everybody knows what a meter is. The only reason we can have anything in physics and chemistry, and we can do all of those things, is everybody has a very clear idea about what a meter is, what a second is, what a temperature Kelvin is, all of these different units, the pascals, all of these things. We know what they are, and we can reproduce them independently. So you can conduct an experiment, and I can conduct an experiment. We have the same exact frame of reference, which is a meter. And that's because we have a constant that can measure these physical quantities. In economics, what we're dealing with, the subject of economics, is human valuation of economic goods. But human valuation does not have a constant unit. So because we don't have a constant unit, we end up performing math without units, which is invalid. So this is something...
Yeah. By the way, I had this argument with the EPA director in a hearing once. I'm like, can you do science without math? No. Can you do math science without units? No. You have to have math to do science, and you have to have units to do any of that. But keep going.
Yeah, so if you have units, if we manage to find, so in the micro textbook, you might remember some of the micro textbooks, they come up with a fake unit called the util for measuring utility that people get, which is silly, because what is a util? You know, how many apples are in a util, or how many?
It makes me happy. Yeah, happy units.
Exactly, but you know, how many Ferraris can you exchange for a util, or all of those things? Obviously, it's meaningless because we have no metric by which we can define a util as being something that gives me this kind of happiness or that kind of happiness. We're all taught all of this stuff can't be precisely measured, and so if it can't be precisely measured, we cannot perform economic calculation on it. The one constant unit, the one thing that can perform economic calculation, is the individual himself. And so this is why, for me, Austrian economics makes you a libertarian almost always, is because you understand that there can't be an authority, a person in a position of authority that can perform economic calculation, that can figure out for you what is the way that can maximize your happiness. Because I can't figure out the options that you have. You know, should you piss off AIPAC today, or should you piss off the environmentalists today, or should you piss off the COVID cult today? I don't know how much satisfaction you get from any of these, so that I could perform the economic calculation for you and tell you you should spend your day doing this. But you can do that for yourself, because you can organize things according to your self as the frame of reference, while giving each one of those things a valuation that is ordinal, but not cardinal. Okay. So you don't attach a unit to it, but you compare them to one another.
Well, let me push back just a little bit. Maybe we do have, like, GDP is measured in dollars. Interest rates is actually unitless, I guess. It's a relative thing, right? But there are some measures, maybe, and if you could predict the GDP a year from now, giving certain units, you know, you would be rich, right? Like, if maybe it's because a lot of this just isn't predictable, and there's so many inputs, you would need like chaos theory to model it. It's almost like the weather. We know when it's about to rain if the barometer changes, right? But
yes. But there's a lot more predictability in the weather. So a lot of people like to bring up the argument of complexity, and this is kind of a Hayekian argument, and there is some merit to it, that we need computers that are maybe too big. But I think it's a wrong argument, because computers keep getting better, but they're never going to be good enough to perform economic calculation without a constant unit. As long as we're looking at things that don't have units, then no amount of processing power can perform that economic calculation. And so the history of socialism from an economic perspective is people thinking they got over that because they found a way to perform economic calculation with mathematical tools applied to things that don't have units. And that's why socialism always falls apart. It's not so much the complexity, because you can perform very complex calculations. You can run a supercomputer that runs for a long time, and it can, you know, even a system that has millions of causal factors. You can still perform economic calculation, but you need units. And that's what we don't have.
So you're saying math is hard, so we shouldn't do it. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I think we should try. Obviously, there are quants working on Wall Street that can predict things at least a picosecond into the future, and that's how they make money. But we could try. I just want to.
Yeah, but that's entrepreneurial judgment, though, not scientific prediction. So there's a difference between making an entrepreneurial judgment, saying, I think next year Apple stock is going to go up and I'm going to bet on it. And then if I do it, that's very different from a scientist who's calculating what's the pressure of this volume of this gas going to be if it is that volume and at this temperature, That's great. You haven't convinced me completely, but I feel like an embarrassment of riches being able to have this conversation with you. I just spent hours of my life listening to a book, which I found very enriching. And now I get to talk to the brain that was behind it. And it almost like my questions must seem like very stupid to you. No, absolutely not. This is a very smart question that very smart engineers usually ask, because they get it and they see why it's just so much more easier to do things in engineering. And they don't quite get why this Nobel Prize winner like Krugman is putting these meaningless equations and not even solving them, but just telling us this is how it should be.
Well, now I understand better why your book was resonating with me at 1.25x on the audio. So you probably, because also you don't narrate the book. It's somebody else. So until I met you here today, I wondered if that voice was you to me for several weeks in my car. But now I'm talking to a different voice. But I think if they had spoken at 1.25x, it would be more like you.
Well, my third book, Principles of Economics, which discusses this in detail, I do read the audiobook for that one. So I'm going to send it to you, and you can listen to that one, and then we can have a longer discussion about it. I'd be delighted to do it anytime. It's an honor, sir.
So if I go do 10 more hours of homework, I can come back and enjoy another 30-minute conversation with you. I will do it.
No, but listen, you can do 30 minutes of reading, and then we can have another 10-hour conversation as well. Anytime. Okay. I'm always ready.
Sounds great.
Or we could make this as a regular podcast feature. We just do this an episode every week. I'm happy to do it.
All right. Thanks. Thank you very much. This has been so enjoyable.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's an honor and a pleasure. Really, I don't have many politicians that I respect and look up to, but you definitely are one. And I really thank you for everything you're doing on all of those issues, on COVID, on Palestine, on foreign policy, on funding the war machine, everything. Thank you so much, sincerely.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to your next book. I'm going to read the third one next. I'm going to skip the second one.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks
a lot. I'll listen to it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.